There is a photograph from Central Africa, taken around 1960, that people assume is staged the first time they see it. It shows a small wooden boat on open water. In the boat are 2 or 3 men, sunburnt, in shorts, no equipment worth mentioning. And in the water beside the boat, held by ropes, being towed along like a barge, is a fully grown black rhinoceros. They are not hunting it, they are moving it, because the hill it was standing on is going under, and if they leave it there, it will drown. Behind that photograph is a lake that had not existed a few years earlier, spreading out across a valley at a rate of many square kilometers a week, swallowing forest, hills, villages, and everything living in them. And working across that rising water, for 5 years, was a team of men in rowboats who had decided they were going to physically carry the wildlife of an entire valley out of it, one animal at a time. They moved around 6,000 animals, by hand. Antelope, warthog, zebra, buffalo, monkeys, leopards, elephants, rhinoceros. Also porcupines, tortoises, and, because of a decision that tells you a great deal about the man in charge, venomous snakes. It sounds like a tall story that grew in the telling, and it is not. It was covered by the press of the day, it was photographed and filmed, and it has a name, Operation Noah. But it also has a second half that almost never gets told alongside it. And once you know it, the whole thing changes shape. The lake is Lake Kariba, and it sits on the Zambezi River, on the border between what are now Zambia and Zimbabwe. In the 1950s, that region was under British colonial administration, and it had a serious power problem. There were enormous copper mining operations to the north and growing industry to the south, and all of it needed electricity on a scale that did not exist yet. The Zambezi ran through a narrow gorge with steep rock walls, which is close to ideal for a hydroelectric dam, so the decision was made to seal the gorge. Construction began in the mid-1950s, run by an Italian engineering firm, and it was brutal work in extreme heat. Dozens of workers were killed during the build, with the number usually given as around 86, and several of them are still entombed in the concrete of the wall. The river also fought back in a way that is still talked about. During construction, the Zambezi produced 2 extraordinary floods in consecutive years, and the second was described afterwards as the kind of event you would expect once in thousands of years. It came close to destroying the works. The Tonga people who lived along that stretch of the Zambezi had their own reading of that. The river, in their belief, belongs to a spirit called Nyaminyami, and the dam had cut him off from his wife on the other side of the wall. The floods were his answer. Whatever you make of the theology, the engineering record is clear that the river very nearly won. But it did not, and in 1958 the gates closed, and the water started to back up behind the wall. What formed was, at the time, the largest reservoir ever created by human beings, roughly 280 kilometers long, thousands of square kilometers of surface. A volume of water so large that geologists recorded a cluster of small earthquakes as the crust adjusted to the weight of it. And it did not fill quickly and dramatically, it filled slowly and relentlessly, over years, which is precisely what created the problem. Picture what that looks like from inside the valley. The water comes up, it is not a wave, and it is not a flood. It is a slow rise, and at first it simply means the river is wider. Animals move to higher ground, which is exactly the correct instinct and exactly what they have always done. Then the higher ground becomes a hill surrounded by water. Then the hill becomes an island. Then the island gets smaller. Then it gets smaller again. There is grass, then less grass, then none. And around it, in every direction, kilometers of open water, in a river system containing crocodiles and hippopotamus. Some animals could swim it. Many could not, or would not, or had no way of knowing where the shore was. So they stayed on the shrinking ground and waited for something that was not coming. There were thousands of these islands forming across the new lake, and the wildlife of the whole valley was concentrating onto them. The men who decided to do something about it were led by a game ranger named Rupert Fothergill, working out of the southern side. He was not running a large organization. The team was small, the funding was minimal, and the equipment was whatever they could get. And the actual job, when you look at what it required, is close to absurd, So if you have ever wondered how a group of men in wooden boats physically remove a rhinoceros from an island, take a second to subscribe, because the methods they used are the part that makes people realize this story is not exaggerated at all. Start with the easiest case, which is not easy. For small and medium antelope, the approach was often to drive them. A line of men would move across an island, pushing the animals ahead of them toward the water, where boats were waiting. Animals that went into the water were caught, held and either lifted into a boat or supported alongside it, while it was rowed or motored to the mainland. Holding a struggling adult antelope in open water from a small boat is genuinely dangerous. They kick, they twist, they are far stronger than they look, and a panicking animal will drown itself. Men were injured constantly, broken ribs, gashes from hooves and horns, exhaustion. For animals that could not be driven, they used nets and ropes. Teams would rush an animal, get lines onto it, and wrestle it down by weight of numbers. Photographs from the operation show 4 and 5 men lying across a single kudu, holding it still. Then there is the category that cannot be wrestled. Rhinoceros, buffalo, and elephant could only be moved with chemical immobilization, and this is where the operation was genuinely at the edge of what was possible at the time. The drugs available for anesthetizing large wild animals in the late 1950s were new, poorly understood, and unforgiving. The margin between a dose that puts a 2-ton animal down and a dose that kills it was not well established, because nobody had done enough of it yet to know. Vets were, in effect, working it out in the field, on animals they were trying to save, with the water rising. They lost animals to it. That is part of the honest record. Some of the rhinos and buffalo that died during Operation Noah died because the dose was wrong. And once an animal is down, the problem has only started, because now you have an unconscious rhinoceros on an island and no crane. The solution was to get it into the water, where it weighs far less, secure it with ropes, and tow it, with the head held clear of the surface, behind a boat. That is what the photograph at the start of this shows. There was no better way to do it. Elephants were sometimes handled differently, because elephants swim well. Where possible, the team would encourage them into the water and then escort them across, boats moving alongside to keep them heading for the shore rather than turning back to an island that was disappearing. And then there were the snakes. Fothergill made a decision early on that the operation was not going to be a rescue of the animals people find appealing. If it was alive on the island, it was going into the boat. So the team collected snakes, including highly venomous species, and moved them too. They caught tortoises. They collected small mammals, birds, and lizards. The scale is easy to picture with a rhino and easy to forget with a tortoise, but a great deal of the 6,000 figure is animals nobody would put on a poster. It is worth picturing what a working day actually consisted of, because the romance drops away fast. You are on a lake in the Zambezi Valley, which means heat that sits in the high 30s and beyond, and humidity to go with it. You are in an open boat with no shade. The water contains crocodiles and hippopotamus in particular kill more people in Africa than almost anything else, and they do not appreciate boats. You are landing on an island that is shrinking, where the animals are already starving, already frightened, and in no condition to be helpful. Then you spend the day physically fighting animals that outweigh you, in shallow water, on mud, and every one of them believes you are trying to kill it. Because from the point of view of the antelope, that is exactly what is happening. There is no way to explain the plan to it. At the end of that, you have moved some animals, and tomorrow the water is higher, and there is another island. They did this for years, not as a funded expedition with a departure date, but as an ongoing job that only ended when there was nothing left above water to go back for. The operation ran for around 5 years, following the water as it rose, working island after island, until the lake reached its full extent in the early 1960s. The rescued animals were released on the mainland shores. On the southern side, a large proportion went into the area that later became Matusadona National Park, which sits along the lake and which owes a real part of its wildlife population to animals carried there in boats. Operation Noah also did something none of the men involved were aiming at. It was reported internationally, with photographs, at a moment when there was very little public appetite for wildlife stories. People in Europe and North America saw pictures of rangers hauling antelope into rowboats, and it landed. It is regularly cited as one of the events that helped build a popular constituency for wildlife rescue as a thing worth doing and worth funding, which mattered enormously in the decades that followed. So that is the story as it is usually told, and it is a good one, and it is true. Now here is the part that is almost always left out. While all of this was happening, the same rising water was displacing about 57,000 people. The Tonga had lived in that section of the Zambezi Valley for generations. Their farming, their fishing, their food supply and their entire way of life were built around the river and its floodplain, which is fertile precisely because the river floods it. The reservoir was going to put all of that underwater. They were told to move. Many did not want to, and did not accept the authority of the decision. In 1958, there was a confrontation over the relocations, and police opened fire. 8 Tonga men were killed. The relocations went ahead, and the communities were resettled away from the river on land that was drier and less fertile, without the floodplain that their agriculture depended on. Compensation was minimal. The economic damage was permanent, and the effects are still visible in those communities today, generations later. They are frequently described as among the people who paid the most for the electricity that dam produced and received the least from it. Set the two operations next to each other, and the contrast is very hard to look away from. An extraordinary, dangerous, 5-year effort, carried out with real courage, to physically carry 6,000 animals out of a flooding valley. And in the same valley, at the same time, under the same rising water, 57,000 people were moved off their land. 8 of them were shot, and they were put down somewhere worse. That is not an argument that Operation Noah should not have happened. The men in those boats were not the people making relocation policy, and there is nothing dishonorable about pulling a drowning animal out of water. It is a point about what the colonial administration of the time considered a crisis requiring heroic intervention, and what it considered an administrative matter. Both were consequences of the same wall of concrete. Only one of them got rowboats. There is also an ecological limitation worth being clear about. 6,000 animals sounds like an enormous rescue, and as an individual act of mercy it is. As ecosystem conservation, it is much more modest than it appears. The valley itself was gone. Thousands of square kilometers of riverine forest, floodplain and grassland went permanently underwater, and no amount of boat work brings that back. The rescued animals were released onto shorelines that already had their own wildlife and their own carrying capacity, and there was no follow-up study tracking how many of them survived the first year. Realistically, many did not. What Operation Noah actually achieved was saving a large number of individual animals from a specific horrible death and seeding populations along the new shoreline. Those are real and worthwhile. It did not offset the habitat loss, and nobody serious claims it did. The lake itself became something nobody planned. The drowned forest is still there in places. The bleached trunks of mopane trees standing dead in shallow water decades later, which is one of the strangest landscapes in southern Africa. An invasive floating weed exploded across the surface in the early years and choked huge areas, until it was eventually brought under control using an introduced beetle that feeds on it, which is a whole story of its own. A small sardine species was brought in from another African lake and established a fishery that now supports a very large number of people around the lake shore. Lake Kariba today is a working ecosystem and a working economy, neither of which existed before 1958. And the wall is still there, and it is not without problems. Decades of water pouring through the spillway have carved a deep scour hole in the rock below the dam, and there has been a long-running international effort to stabilize it, because the consequences of a failure on that river, with the population living downstream, do not bear thinking about. The thing that created the lake requires permanent attention to keep it from becoming a different kind of disaster. But go back to that photograph. A wooden boat on a lake that did not exist 5 years earlier. 2 or 3 men with rope and no proper equipment. And in the water beside them a black rhinoceros, held up, breathing, being taken to a shore it did not know existed, because a hill turned into an island and the island ran out. They did that around 6,000 times. Nobody made them. There was no budget for it, no legal requirement, and in the world of the 1950s, no obvious reason why anyone in authority should care what happened to the animals on those islands. A valley was drowned to make electricity, and while it went under, a handful of men decided that at least some of what was living in it was going to come out. If you enjoy true stories of the wild pulled back from the very edge, stories most people never hear told properly, then like this video and subscribe. In the next one, we will follow another place the world had already given up on. Take care of yourself and stay curious.